teachers, developers, you're right. Every single idea that we share could be multiple days of learning in and of themselves. So whenever we do core, which is essentially like a one-day opportunity to introduce people to critical aspects of pastoral leadership and service, that's all it is. It's an introduction. It's like, hey, there's this big world out there. This is something to be aware of. Here's some tools. But we also expect and recognize that we're all going to be constant learners, right? So we have some awareness of what we need to do for leadership. But every one of these, self-leadership, developing leaders, and what we're about to talk about, dealing with conflict, could be multiple days together and a lifetime to even come close to mastering. Okay, so everybody's back. Yay, thanks for a little break. I'm just going to put up a prayer from St. Thomas More, who was the Lord Chancellor of England during the reign of King Henry VIII, and absolutely refused to believe that King Henry VIII's moral depravity was a model to be followed, and as a result was in frequent trouble, and in fact, eventually locked up in the Tower of London and then beheaded. So this is the kind of prayer that this Saint Thomas More, if you're a Roman Catholic, would pray in regard to the many enemies, including the king himself. And I would just invite, Lori, could you please pray this? And this, by the way, is a prayer he would pray daily, and literally in his prayer guide, he left it blank to have mercy on because his enemies change all the time. And he would list the names of those that had literally were trying to kill him. So you don't have to put in a name, but feel free to lead this prayer for us.
On behalf of an enemy, Almighty God, have mercy on them, and on all that bear me evil will, and would do me harm, and on their faults and mine together, by such easy, tender, merciful means as your own infinite wisdom can best devise. Vouchsafe to amend and redress, and make us saved souls in heaven together, where we may ever live in love together with you and your blessed saints.
Amen. What a prayer. So in our politically divided world, when sometimes even to think the name of a person is enough to lead to anger and frustration. Name the person, but what a prayer. Lord, have mercy on that person, even as you've had mercy on me. And may we together rejoice in heaven through the saving of our souls. Wow. Rather than, oh, I wish he'd die. Okay, Andrew, go ahead, Divine.
Sorry, I literally had this conversation with my uncle yesterday. And I was like, we need to be praying for this particular person. And he's like, I've been side-eyeing God about this person.
So difficult to live out the basic biblical principle of love thy enemy. And yet there is no more fundamentally, distinctively defining Christian principle. So really, that's the principle that really separates Christianity from virtually every other world religion. Love thy enemy. So let's practice, because if you're going to lead, you're going to make enemies. There's just no way around it. And they won't even think of themselves as your enemies. But when they oppose you, because you're leading them in a direction that may not necessarily want to go, you will feel that they are enemies because they say things like, we can't do that, and you're an idiot. So we need to learn to kind of breathe deep and remember the prayer of Saint Thomas More. I call this little section relational judo. It's funny because I met with Divine a couple of days ago, and she said, do you know judo? I do not. The only thing I know about judo is that it is a martial art, which is pretty intense, and it's the gentle way, which to me is a pretty good descriptor of how we as Christian leaders ought to engage conflict. These are the principles of judo. Have good posture, demonstrate courtesy, take initiative, remain balanced, be stable, and always, even when you're throwing your partner to the ground, be gentle. Uh, isn't that interesting? So um, it isn't about dominance and force and destruction. It's about grappling together. And that's often what we do. We grapple together with those in our midst. Of course, you're aware that that was nothing new for Jesus or any of the apostles. Um, so let's see. Praise, could you please read this out and perhaps with the same kind of intensity that no doubt you can imagine?
Crucify him! They shouted.
Yeah,
Mark 15.
exactly. That's that's pretty intense. So we know Jesus faced an incredible amount of pushback to the point of death. Leading for transformation necessitates change. Change is always disruptive. Some people will feel loss. And when that happens, they will resist it. People aren't against you. 9 times out of 10, my friends, people aren't against you. They're just against their sense of loss. So as we engage in conflict, recognize that. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but I think this is an important way to think about approaching conflict in general. In this particular model of being able to approach conflict, you can see that as we approach a group and as we approach a group that may have competing needs, we can either do so with a sense of cooperation or a sense of self and assertiveness. In fact, we do both. A real question is whether we're going to approach a sense of conflict with a level of assertiveness and cooperation that's actually going to lead to a better outcome. Now, you notice the little tags I have on this graph: win, lose, 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 win, win, lose, win, and meh, meh. This is a very common way of thinking about approaching conflict and a very common way of thinking about the kinds of solutions that can happen. And you as a leader may find yourself engaging in all of these, and sometimes it's appropriate to engage conflict using these various strategies because of the necessity of that particular conflict. But mostly we engage in conflict with a particular style that suits us, depending on our level of assertiveness or unassertiveness, or whether we are cooperative or uncooperative, almost by nature. So many people, in fact, I would venture to say most people avoid conflict, particularly in the church, where we've all heard unity is what it's all about. It's all about everybody doing things together. Yay. So if there happens to be a sense of conflict, we don't want to address an issue. We want the issue to magically go away. So we avoid it, which is uncooperative. That requires no cooperation whatsoever. It requires no engagement with other people whatsoever. It is absolutely the opposite of what's required for healthy community. So you might avoid conflict, but you're not engaging the community. You are uncooperative. Further, when you avoid, you absolutely eliminate yourself. Now, there's a difference between dying to self and living for Christ, which we should all engage in, and standing up for that which God has called you to stand up for, which requires a high degree of assertiveness, not for self-gain, but for the gain of the whole. And so those who avoid are absolutely abdicating the call of God to stand up for what happens to be the right thing to do. So it is the least assertive and least cooperative way of approaching conflict, and the most common that we experience in our churches, which is why conflict tends to brew and brew and brew until it's unavoidable anymore. Now, a common way then that we also approach conflict is to accommodate. And some Christians would even view this as the ideal. After all, there needs to be less of us and more of the others. We should look to the needs of others ahead of our own. And so what we do when there's a conflict, say, for example, okay, you can do it. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter what I feel. It doesn't matter what I will bear the consequences of your behavior. The way that I'm going to deal with the conflict is to say, we're going to have peace, by my taking on responsibility for your behavior, and I'm going to let you keep doing whatever it is that's leading to conflict. Accommodation. That also leads to peace. That's a high value for us, right? Peace and unity. So we very often will find ourselves accommodating, very cooperative, highly engaged with the community as a whole, but also not asserting what God has called you or the church to do. And that typically allows misbehavior, by the way, or the lack of a unified, purposeful goal to take place. So when you are avoiding, it's a lose-lose. Nobody wins for that. When you're accommodating, you lose, and whoever you happen to be accommodating wins. It's a lose-win. You just get the bad end of that. Another way of approaching conflict is to compete. And I'm sure that some people in your church or your organization are highly competitive. So it is asserting themselves, their view, their goal above the needs of the group. It is uncooperative, even though it may be highly assertive, even if it's asserting the right thing. The whole point is, I win. I get to be the victor, or our group gets to win. And by the way, this is a value in America right now. You hear it all the time. You know, elections have consequences, and they do. And when a group wins, it's like a competition. If you look at it as win-lose, the minute Trump is elected, he signs 50 executive orders to erase everything Obama did. The minute Biden is elected, he signs 50, now they're not 50, I'm exaggerating both numbers, 50 executive orders to erase everything Trump did. Now, whether you agree with either, understand that's win-lose. That's looking at, well, we're in power now, we win, you lose. So is that the right way to approach things? Well, maybe sometimes. Certainly if I'm playing football, I want to win, someone's going to lose, right? But when it comes to the church and it comes to a group trying to come together to accomplish a unified goal, then there needs to be something better. And that leaves compromise or collaboration. Compromise isn't exactly lose-lose, and it's not exactly win-win. That's meh. We've both agreed, you know, our different groups, the Sunday school group that wants to have more time or money, and the worship team that wants to have more time or money. You look at everything and you say, well, we're just going to split the budget down the middle, 50-50. Nobody gets what they want, but everybody gets something, everybody loses something. Now that's good. That's cooperative, and that's allowing people to have their perspective, and compromise is the heart, in many cases, of what it means to be able to have peace and unity while moving forward in a conflicted situation. But it's still not exactly the best. Better yet is to collaborate, better to co-labor. I don't mean that collaboration in the way that, let's say, the French who sold out their country to the Nazis were collaborators. I mean, you co-labor together in order to accomplish a greater goal. That's the win-win, where you look at something and you think, well, maybe we're not thinking right by dividing the budget 50-50. Maybe what we need to do is look at what are the greater goals of the church and the organization, and what's going to allow us to accomplish these more effectively. It might mean some real changes for the Sunday school and the worship team. But we're making those changes together. We recognize there's going to be sacrifices, but it's not just splitting stuff 50-50. We're making a conscious decision to do something better and different together for the value of the group as a whole. So there you go. You have an option when you're about to engage conflict to think about trying to lead in one of these ways. Every single one of us tends to lean into one of those almost by nature or temperament. So if you're an extrovert, it's more likely that you're going to be somebody who advocates for competition or for collaboration. If you're an introvert, it's more likely you just don't want to talk to people, I don't want to deal with it. And you might be a little bit happier with accommodation. At least you're giving something to somebody, and there's a moral value in that, even if you suffer alone and quiet in your office, crying into your tea, right? So, I mean, but there's value in that. And we all have different styles of leadership. But I'm going to throw out one other way of thinking about engaging conflict. I'm going to ask for a little bit of conversation about this in groups. And it has less to do with dealing conflict, more with just kind of a style about how you approach an issue when somebody makes a request of you. It's but it's very much tied to conflict because conflict is all about that. It's competing requests or competing demands. How do we deal with those? So I'm going to share with you the idea of bid and response from Dr. John Gottman, which, by the way, in terms of conflict resolution and relationships, it's kind of a classic study on the way people respond to various things. But essentially, there's three ways that people typically respond in relationship and in conflict. One is to turn away, one is to turn against, and one is to turn toward. And so here's how it works. The bid is a bid for attention or the bid for something. So my wife comes and says, you know, Mark, I'd really like you to turn down the TV. I'm trying to have a phone call. Something that simple, right? So to turn away would be to completely ignore that. You know, I pretend I'm watching the TV. I pretend, no, I don't hear her. I'm not paying attention. I know she's made the request, and I know she wants me to turn down the TV. And it would be totally respectful if I did, but I completely ignore her. Turn away, just ignore it. I pretend it's not even there. Which, by the way, is a pretty hostile act, really, when somebody makes a bid for your attention and you ignore it. What that does is it tends in yourself, first, you're not responding to a relational cue. And so you're learning to be more callous. Two, the person that you just ignored knows you just ignored them, or at least suspects it, which means animosity is beginning to bubble up. And you do that enough times, and pretty soon, maybe he didn't hear me becomes, what a butthead. I can't believe I married that jerk. And you know, the relationship spirals down from there. Same thing happens in church. So another thing is to turn against, and this is common. Honey, I'm trying to talk on the phone. Could you please turn down the TV? You know, I'm trying to watch the game. Now know your place, woman, and go to the other room. All right, there you go. I turned against. I become the enemy of somebody. And in every possible way, that is overtly hostile. Now, if you happen to have power in a dominant relationship, that can happen for a while before things fall apart. I think it's ungodly and unhealthy to turn against. At the same time, it's super common and often seen in relational or toxic behavior, even in church. So a pastor might get the bid for attention, and it's you know, lousy, despicable person. I don't have any reason to talk to you at all. Or you can have groups become hostile toward each other. Usually, by the way, as a result of having needs ignored, turning away. But the third posture is to turn toward. Honey, I'm trying to talk on the phone. Could you turn down the TV? What was that, hon? I couldn't hear because the TV's too loud. I'm asking if you could turn down the TV because I'm trying to talk to my friend. Oh, of course, I'd be more than glad to. Or, you know, I'm really watching this game. It's super important. I wonder, do you mind talking on the porch or whatever? But you don't ignore the issue. You turn toward it. You listen to it. You have a response. May not even be the response the other person wants to hear, but you didn't ignore it and you weren't hostile. That leads to health long-term in a relationship and in a church. Now, most of us tend to live in one of those three spaces reflexively in particular relationships. The healthiest place for a leader to live is always to turn toward. So if you hear complaints, don't ignore them. Even if they're not core, even if they're fringe, even if they're not something that is really going to affect the bottom line, the most important thing is that people in your community are aware that at least you're listening, at least you're not ignoring them. So you can find ways to say to that person who wants to do a Sunday school program and they're mad that you didn't give them enough budget, for example, you could just ignore it, pretend you didn't hear it. Or you could be angry. That's not part of our main mission or goal, just go away. But turning toward might be something more like, it sounds like you're really concerned about the future of the Sunday school program. I too am concerned about the developing of the next generation of our church and in our world. So thank you for bringing that to my attention. And I look forward to an opportunity to think about that as we move forward. So you turned toward. You didn't agree, maybe, right? But at least they know you heard them. Fundamentally important in the world of leading the church. So a quick question. I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to kind of mull this over in your group. And that is, what is your basic style of conflict management? That is, do you compromise? Do you, abdicate? Do you go for a collaborative win-win? What kind of style do you tend to lean into, and how is that related to your kind of default of turning away, turning against, turning toward? Okay, got about 10 minutes for that. I'm going to break you all up.